the Cairo temperature outside the cabin reported to be 26 degrees Celsius.
I've just arrived here to Egypt as it gets ready to host global leaders ahead of the COP27 climate change conference. Now, reporting from Egypt is very difficult, especially around sensitive issues like human rights. So I'm going to be reporting from the country discreetly on mobile phones, trying to get at the real story of what's happening in this country today.
Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is hoping to use the United Nations annual climate negotiations to gain legitimacy on an international stage.
أود التأكيد على أن مصر لن تدخر جهدا في سبيل إنجاح القمة العالمية للمناخ.
So just ahead of COP, the Egyptian government is trying to show off that it's implementing a number of sustainable projects in Cairo and across the country. But there's a much darker side to what's happening in Egypt today, and that's prisons containing thousands of journalists, activists, and just ordinary Egyptians. The Egyptian government is one of the worst jailers of journalists worldwide and controls nearly every publication in the country. One of Egypt's last remaining independent news outlets is Mada Masr.
فينه so far إنه هو يعني كوب أفريقي مصر هي اللي واخداه كل الرؤساء اللي جايين.
فحتى لما يعني أغلب الخطاب حوالين الخطاب المحلي حوالين الكوب إنه هيتعمل في مصر وكده، الكوب بالناس اللي المفروض هتيجي بتتظاهر أو بتنشط أو بتتناقش وأنتوا أصلاً حابسين الناس عندكم.
Mada Masr's editor-in-chief, Lina Atallah, has been arrested and charged with various crimes in recent years, including spreading fake news.
Can you paint us a picture of how dangerous or how difficult it is to be a journalist today in Egypt?
So what's left for an independent journalist who, by some sort of a miracle, is not in jail yet is a very tight room for maneuvering where very hard to get information, sources are too scared to talk to you, and you constantly operate under the risk of being jailed and your newsroom being shut down. For example, in 2019, right in this newsroom where we're at when the cops raided our office, I was in custody with the rest of my colleagues in this newsroom and thinking who will write the obituary of Mada, you know.
There was a brief opening for press freedom after the 2011 revolution that brought down the repressive regime of Hosni Mubarak. But since el-Sisi rose to power in a military coup 2 years later, that window has been tightly shut. In the lead up to COP27, his government has made some concessions. Hundreds of political prisoners have been released, but it's estimated that more than 60,000 remain. And last year, el-Sisi launched a national human rights strategy, which Amnesty International decried as an attempt to deceive the international community.
Since it was announced that Egypt would host COP27, has anything actually changed for, independent media in Egypt?
I'm very happy that ahead of COP, a lot of political prisoners are being released. There are many more yet to be released. That being said, there hasn't been any improvement on my conditions as a journalist.
The most prominent political prisoner in Egypt is Abdel Fattah, a writer who was active in the revolution.
ولسه في الشباب اللي مش لاقي شغل انتوا عارفين كل ده وبالتالي انتوا عارفين انه ضروري الثوره تبقى مستمره.
He's been in prison for most of the past 9 years, allegedly for spreading fake news in a Facebook post he shared. He's been on a partial hunger strike for 7 months, a strike the Egyptian government has officially denied. He comes from a family of human rights activists, including his mother, Leila Swaif. She's closely monitored by the police, so we met her at an undisclosed location in Cairo.
انت كويسة؟
أنا تمام.
The family, including Leila's daughter Sanaa, who's currently living in London, is directing their activism toward getting Alaa released.
يعني المفروض في شوية media attention بدأ يظهر أصلاً.
برافو عليك يا حبيبي.
متحمسة أوي إن إحنا نرجع نعمل good old activism طبيعي.
يلا شدي حيلك بقى عشان تجيلنا.
Is this version of, the Egyptian regime, is it the worst you've ever seen in this country?
I have never seen during all my life this complete disregard for any kind of rule of law and this complete disregard for human life.
Why has Alaa become such a target of this government?
He's so popular and so liked by a certain generation. It makes the message stronger. We can do this to him, so yani, shut up. The rest of you. Yani.
What effect have you seen it have on Alaa's, physical and mental health?
Since he went on hunger strike, He's physically worse, but mentally better, because he feels that he's fighting. But he is very, very weak, and I'm afraid that quite soon he can start really deteriorating. And if something, God forbid, like if he should go into a coma or die while COP is going on, they're going to have a real mess on their hands.
Egypt relies heavily on foreign support. Each year it receives over $1 billion in aid from the United States and has billions more in trade deals with European governments, including the United Kingdom. We went to London, where Sanaa is staging a sit-in outside the UK Foreign Ministry, trying to pressure them to intervene in her brother's case, since, in addition to being Egyptian, the family are also British citizens. This is your home for the foreseeable future, I guess.
Yeah, I'm staying here from now on, I don't know. At least for the next 20 days, I guess, until COP.
Sanaa herself has spent more than 3 years in prison in Egypt, most recently for staging a similar protest in support of her brother.
It's crazy because it's not that my voice is that important, right? They make your voice meaningful by putting you in prison. Like, nobody knew me. If Alaa wasn't that targeted, he wouldn't have been that prominent. Our family wouldn't have been that prominent. They kind of created the problem for themselves. They use you to set an example for others, but you resist because you want to survive. And so when you resist, you become an example for resistance, and we're in this vicious cycle for like 9 years now.
Do you think that without the international support that the Egyptian government has, it would be able to continue jailing people like Alaa?
Absolutely not. This regime would not exist till now, at least in that way, without the support of other governments.
And what about, to the politicians who say, well, COP27 is about climate change, which is the existential crisis that we're all facing, and we need to go to Sharm el-Sheikh and deal with climate change and, deal with human rights another time.
The problem here is that life on the planet is in danger. And right now, life in Egypt is in danger.
So COP27 has just kicked off, and delegates from all over the world have come here to the resort town of Sharm el-Sheikh. Now, the Egyptian authorities are keeping very tight control of this event. They've brought in security from across the country. Some of the tightest security was in the designated protest zone across the highway from the main conference, where the only people protesting seemed to be government supporters.
Sharm el-Sheikh! Sharm el-Sheikh! Sharm el-Sheikh! Sharm el-Sheikh! Climate justice! Climate justice!
While inside the conference, world leaders lined up to shake hands with President el-Sisi. But none of these leaders seemed to want to talk about human rights. Matthew Castle, Vice News, can I come with one question? Are you going to be pressing the Egyptian government on its human rights record? Would you give us a comment on jailed British-Egyptian hunger striker Alaa Abdel Fattah? Is the British government going to be demanding his release? You've been very outspoken in support of human rights in Ukraine. Are you going to be doing the same in Egypt? Will anyone from the US government be pressing the Egyptians on its human rights record?
We have that.
Of all the leaders at COP, Alaa's family pinned their hopes on British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to press his case the hardest with el-Sisi. Days before arriving in Egypt, he told Sanaa in a letter that he would do everything he could for Alaa's release. But when we asked him about it, he refused to answer. Are you going to demand that Egypt release British citizen Alaa Abdel Fattah from prison? Prime Minister Sunak, can he make a comment on that? Can he make a comment on it now? Prime Minister Sunak, just a comment on the British citizen, a comment on the British citizen who's right now on hunger strike. By this point, it had been more than 2 days since Alaa escalated his strike and stopped drinking water entirely. With the world's eyes on Egypt, Sanaa traveled to COP to try and force action on his case.
We don't know where he is. We don't know if he's alive. My mother waited outside the prison gates for 10 hours yesterday for her weekly letter. They didn't give her one. I asked the British authorities to get us some proof that Alaa is alive and conscious. I did not get any response.
The press conference was well attended by international media and climate activists. Pro-government agitators also showed up.
جايين النهارده تهاجموا مصر. أي تدخل أجنبي للضغط لإصلاح حقوقي مصيره الفشل والضرر بالشعب المصري.
Both gentlemen have said a variation of the same narrative that we keep hearing, that Egypt cannot be forced, Egypt's hands cannot be forced by the West.
Security, could we please stop the disruption?
I am free to speak to her.
Egyptian parliament. No. You are here in the Egyptian land. Don't touch me. You are here in the Egyptian land.
UN security threw the member of parliament out of the press conference. But to one local journalist from a pro-government outlet, the outburst was proof that freedom of expression isn't actually under threat in Egypt.
حضرتك موجود النهارده في اصوات كتير ممكن تتكلم ممكن تعبر عن رايها.
But this is special circumstances here at COP27. You know better than I do. If I were to go to Cairo and try to talk to people about these issues, it would be very difficult, if not impossible.
ربما المصري عبد الفتاح السيسي اتاح الفرصه لكل الناس انها بالذات هذه الفتره من خلال الحوار الوطني انها تتكلم وتعبر عن رايها وتقول رايها وده متاح.
With the conclusion of COP just days away, Alaa's family received a letter saying that he had ended his hunger strike.
If the pressure that you and other supporters of your brother are putting right now on the Egyptian regime to release him, if that works, what will it mean for this country and human rights in this country going forward?
It means hope, but that doesn't mean that the issue ended. Alaa is just one person, but also we don't have to wait for opportunities like COP27. Alaa has been in prison for 9 years. If we've had that attention earlier, we could have saved many more.
I'm Michael Learmonth, editor-in-chief of Vice News. Too often, traditional news outlets shy away from the real stories and experiences of those living through global conflicts. Not Vice News. Our reporters are on the ground, fearlessly covering the human stories that shape our world. You and millions of others can continue to read, watch, and listen to Vice News for free. But we hope you'll consider making a one-time or ongoing contribution of any size at vice.com/contribute. Every contribution, no matter how big or small, helps support the journalism Vice News brings to you every day. Thank you.